In this lesson, we'll discuss the Animation Layer Editor's toolbar. This is lesson 03 in your project files. If we were to play the animation, what we should see is a character jumping, with a cartoony type style. And over to our right, we'll see the layers that make up this animation. So what we're focusing on in this lesson is the Layer Editor's toolbar. These buttons at the top, and we want to become comfortable with them because these are going to allow us to initially get the results that we like out of the layers that we create. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and show the floating window. This might be better to work with for this lesson. And what we're going to go ahead and do is basically start from the first button here. We already know what this zero key layer button does for us. It's going to allow us to take a zero offset, or the pose coming from our original animation, from the base animation, and paste that to whatever layer we have selected, and then lock that down with a key. Alright, so what is this good for? This is great for isolating our offsets. So we can basically determine when we'd like that offset to start, and that's when we'd use a zero key, at about a pose that we'd like to keep from the original animation. And then we'd go to a frame or several frames that we'd like to add those offsets using the layer. And then to finish up the offset effect, we can go ahead and go to a different frame and set another zero key to bring us right back to our original animation if we choose to. So that's what this button is going to do for us. A very handy button. I use it a lot when working with animation layers. Alright, so let's go ahead and discuss the next two buttons then. These deal with a layer's weight. They allow us to not only set a layer to having no weight at all, to having a full weight, but they're going to key that change as well. So to first give you an idea of what the weight of a layer does for us, let's go ahead and pick on the feet take layer. We'll select that, and we'll go to, let's say, frame 22, where the legs are at a big extreme. Now, if we were to go to the bottom of our layer pane, what we should see is our weight attribute. So the weight is going to allow us to control the intensity of a layer. What we're basically doing with the weight is multiplying its value by the value of our attributes. So watch what happens if we were to take this weight and set this to 0.5. You'll see that now we're only getting half the result of what we would get had this layer been at a full weight of 1. So that's how the weight works for us. And notice the key button right to the right of that. Alright. Now, again, if you'd like to set a weight or a layer's weight to 0 and key that, you can use these buttons, or a layer's weight to 1 and key that as well, looking at the button right next to that. So let's go ahead and experiment with this. We'll select the height layer, and let's say we go to about frame 18 as the character is jumping. We'll set a key of 0 to start out. Notice how the character kind of drops there. Alright, so if we were to scrub the animation about the time when the character's feet are flapping, to almost appear like he is flying, just by his foot flaps, we'll go to about frame 30 and we'll set a key of 1. Alright, now notice the change that we get when we do that. Now we have this height layer at its full weight. So watch what happens as we scrub through. What we should see is a character almost flying up a little bit higher and then falling. If we were to hit play, that also leads to him having a greater impact as he falls. Alright, now if we wanted to see the keys, we will be discussing the keyframe filters that we have with our animation layers a little bit later on. But just to show you this quickly, because you're definitely going to want to see what happens with these keys as we set them, we can right click on our layer and choose Select Layer Node. Now once the layer node has been selected, we should see it in the channel box. We can then go to Window, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. Now we see our our height layer in the graph editor, or whatever layer that we've selected the node of. So if we were to scroll all the way down till we get to the weight attribute, there are our keys. Alright, and we can change this however we like. They work like normal keys, of course. Alright, but I just wanted to show you one place we can find those. Great, so that's what these two buttons do for us. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to the next two. The next two are going to allow us to move our layers up and down in hierarchy. Now, before we actually work with these two buttons, we first need to understand something about the different type of layer modes we can have. The first mode that we get by default, unless we change that setting, is a additive layer, meaning that we're just going to have an additive effect as we add these offsets to our layers. So what that means is that if we were to change any of these layers in additive mode, we shouldn't see any difference really. We would see the difference if we were to work with something called an override mode, and we're going to be discussing that a little bit later on in more detail. But what the override does for us is allows us to work with our layers almost in the form of gates. So what that means is that it's going to block any incoming connections that are coming from a preceding layer. So to give you an idea of how this works, if we were to select our height layer and we were to go to layers, mode, and change this to override, you'll see that our character almost appears to go back to his bind pose in midair. What's happening is that all of the attributes that are tied to this layer, it's basically keeping those values but then blocking out any other incoming connections coming from this base animation level. So why would anyone want to use the override layer? Well, there may be times when you'd want to bring or actually add a different type of change to an object altogether without having any effect coming from a different layer. So that's what an override layer would be great for, and it's actually, believe it or not, going to be widely used, at least in my animation process, and I believe it will be in yours as well because it's a great tool. So going back to these buttons here, now watch what happens if we take this height layer and bring this up. You'll notice that we do get a slight change. We saw a different change in the offset of our feet, okay, because now we're blocking some connections coming from our feet take, okay, being that this is higher. And we will be discussing the how we can really use these override layers to work out great for us. We're going to get into some workflow ideas and techniques. All right, so don't you worry about that at all, okay, because we will be discussing that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and right click, but before I do, okay, I just wanted to show you that we can move these again up and down using these two buttons. We see the difference here. And another way we can actually see a difference, if we were to right click the height, go to layer mode, bring that back to additive, and then let's say go to our feet take, go back to layers, go to layer accumulation mode. Okay, so this deals with rotation and also scale, but we'll pick on rotation right now. This is another thing we'll get into a little bit later on. I'll switch this to quaternion, and what we should see is a slight difference with our feet. What's nice is that, yes, we can change our layers to a quaternion or Euler mode, which may help to give us better results in our rotations. If you're not familiar with quaternion, it's great for avoiding gimbal lock. So that's a great tool that Maya has added to their animation layers, which really makes this tool stand out from other apps. All right, so if we really wanted to see this change, let's go to another type of extreme. Let's say frame 22. We can go back to layers, go to layer accumulation, switch this to Euler, and we should see a difference with our feet. In this case, Euler might work best for us, but if you're running into any gimbal lock, you can go ahead and use quaternion and see if that'll give you a better result. Now, again, if we were to move this layer down, we may see a difference based off of its position. Okay, and this all is a matter of the incoming connections. If they're rotate keys, then we may definitely see that change. But being that we're not really working with any rotate keys except for this feet take layer, then we didn't really see any difference because of that. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this back to Euler. All right, well, now that that's discussed, we now have or come up to the empty layer, and we know what the last button does for us, so we don't really need to discuss that. Okay, but this empty layer, this is great because we can essentially use this to organize our layers. We don't have to add any attributes or objects to them at all. So to give you an idea of this, if we were to just click to add an empty layer, it's right at the top. Let's say if we wanted to organize some of our layers, making this empty layer an upper body parent, And yes, you heard right, we can parent layers. So if we were to call this upper body, we can take all of the layers that should basically go to this or be parented underneath this upper body organizing layer, and then we can middle click and drag right into that. And you'll see that now they are underneath the hierarchy of this layer, of the upper body layer that we've added. And if we were to go ahead and take a look at this really quickly, selecting one of our controls, okay, I'll go ahead and zoom in a little bit closer. All right, notice we don't see any type of green dot at all because this is, again, an empty layer just used for organization, and we can collapse that if we'd like. And notice as we do, we see a dot, okay, in the center of this green circle. This is basically telling us that we have an active layer that's underneath our parent layer. Okay, so we have an active child layer. All right, that's what that dot represents, and we'll also discuss that a little bit later on as well. All right, but I just wanted to go ahead and show you that we can actually use these empty layers for organization, and we'll learn how to add attributes and objects to them later. All right, now to let you know something about this last button here, we already saw what it does. It allows us to add objects to layers, or automatically connect them to layers. Now, one thing you'd want to be mindful of is under the layers menu, if we were to go to add selected objects, this actually works with this button here. So what that means is whatever settings that we have in our add objects to layer options, it's going to reflect how this button works. All right, so that's something you'd want to be very careful of. Now, before we close off this lesson, I'd just like to show you how to delete a layer. So if we were to select this upper body once again, and if we were to go to layers, we can go ahead and move down to delete. And notice that removes the layer altogether, but also notice that it has removed our child layers as well. So that's something we want to be very careful of. I'm going to go ahead and hit Z to undo back to before that change was made, because I don't want to lose those changes at all. All right. Well, that's how we can work with our layer editor toolbar. We really skimmed the surface of it, and we'll be using it more often as we start to discuss workflows and techniques for working with animation layers. But that does finish this lesson.